Good evening and welcome to Nashville. I'm Alan Jackson. The war in Ukraine has dominated international headlines for over 4 years, yet in many ways it has become easy to tune out. Casualty reports have become routine, and despite repeated efforts to broker peace, the fighting continues with no clear end in sight. One reason peace remains so elusive is this is no longer simply a dispute over territory. Vladimir Putin has repeatedly demonstrated he is willing to sacrifice staggering numbers of his own people in pursuit of his objectives. Russia recently launched one of the largest ballistic missile attacks of the war against Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities, including civilian sites. But at the same time, Ukraine has struck military targets more than 1,500 miles inside Russia. They've destroyed oil refineries, critical infrastructure that sustains Moscow's war efforts. CIA Director John Ratcliffe recently revealed that newly deployed Russian recruits survive an estimated 20 to 30 minutes after reaching the front lines before being killed or wounded. It's a sobering reminder of how little the Kremlin appears to value even the lives of its own citizens. We've seen that same disregard from Iran's Islamic regime, which continues to brutally oppress its own people while exporting terror across the Middle East and carrying out attacks against civilian tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, NATO allies are increasing defense spending and strengthening support for Ukraine after years of President Trump urging Europe to carry more of the burden. The United States also continues demonstrating its resolve to confront Iran's aggression in the Strait of Hormuz, protecting one of the world's most vital shipping lanes. In the meantime, Gulf nations are accelerating new energy routes designed to permanently reduce Tehran's leverage over the global economy. And President Trump's doctrine of peace through strength beginning to reshape the calculation of America's allies and adversaries alike? And what do these developments mean for America's security and the future of global stability? Well, after Putin invaded Ukraine back in 2022, for weeks I was on Zoom calls on a regular basis with leaders in the Christian community in Ukraine. It was tragic to hear the stories. The civilian populations were being targeted. Apartment buildings were being decimated by rocket fire. Well, we're now approaching the 4.5-year anniversary of the start of this brutal conflict. It's as if human life is expendable. It's just a number. The human cost of Russia's war in Ukraine, the total deaths and serious injuries sustained by the militaries on both sides, well, it's now estimated to be above 2 million people. This is not merely a battlefield statistic. It means hundreds of thousands of families on both sides have buried sons and daughters, husbands, fathers, brothers. Many more soldiers have returned home with traumatic injuries and psychological trauma. Meanwhile, in Iran, even now, with all the pressure that the U.S. and Israel have put on Iran, with wave after wave of devastating attacks this year, the Islamic regime in Iran is still plotting, still actively targeting innocent people. Evil under the guise of Islam is hunting people in the earth these days. It's hunting even their own people, their own sons and daughters. I believe one of the reasons that the conflict in Iran stays seemingly unresolved is because there's a group of believers there that are praying. I believe God's intent is to bring freedom to those people. I don't know how that will happen, but I do pray that they'll have the freedom in the streets of Tehran and the other cities in that nation to talk about Jesus without any fear of reprisal. You know, the media often frames the Iran conflict as an endless war or an unnecessary war started by President Trump. I disagree. Standing up to the terrorist regime in Iran is necessary. Evil must be confronted. Evil regimes do not stop on their own. The battle between Ukraine and Russia, it must come to a resolution. There's not a solution that's going to make everybody happy, but the bloodshed and the warfare, they have to stop. You don't have to look very far through human history to find leaders who, when they managed to consolidate power, behaved in a beastly way. When communism came to the Russian people, tens of millions of people died. Lenin and Stalin butchered, terrorized, and murdered in the name of giving something to the people. And what they gave to the people was a reign of oppression. But now we see Putin, with a blatant disregard for human life, throwing young Russian men toward a predictable death. We published a book a bit ago called Angels, Demons, and You. There's a verse in Hebrews that says we should be aware that sometimes we have entertained angels. Now, I'd like to share a story. I have a habit at the end of every service to stand at the altar and pray for people. Well, I had an experience a while back when a man came up, introduced himself. He just told me his first name. He said he was Benjamin, had a bit of an accent, and he simply said, "Pastor, we need to pray that the war will end in Ukraine." We stopped and had a prayer. That was all he said, and he slipped away. The conversation was brief. He didn't offer me a business card. There was no commentary. There wasn't a request for support. He didn't announce he was an angel. But I reflected back upon that. There were enough unique characteristics around that brief visit that it has held my attention ever since. I've been praying since then that the war in Ukraine will end. I want to hand that assignment to you if you'll accept it. Let's pray for a swift end to the war. I look forward to hearing testimonies of Christians in Ukraine and Christians in Iran sharing how God led them through unimaginable difficulty. Let's pray for the people of Moscow, Havana, and Caracas who are suffering under oppressive leadership. Let's not simply use our spiritual authority and who we've been called to become in Christ just to resolve our personal problems. I'm happy to pray for personal things. I think that's appropriate, but I believe God has called us to some assignments that are greater than that as well. If we will pray with the purposes of God in mind, there's more reasons for hope than despair, I promise. Well, in a moment, we'll be joined by the Senior Fellow and Director of the Keystone Defense Initiative at the Hudson Institute, Rebeccah Heinrichs. I'll be right back.
This year, we celebrate 250 years of God's faithfulness to our nation. From backyard picnics and ball games to laughter shared with family and friends, we've been given so many blessings to enjoy together. And in a world that feels increasingly divided, these moments remind us of what matters most: faith, freedom, family, and community. Alan Jackson Ministries wants to help you carry that message with you wherever you may go. This outdoor blanket and canvas tote bag are simple reminders of God's goodness and a way to spark meaningful conversations about faith and the hope we have in Him. Request your limited edition tote bag and outdoor blanket today with your gift of $100 or more at alanjackson.com or call 800-880-5102.
Well, tonight we're joined by Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute, Rebeccah Heinrichs. Welcome to the show, Rebeccah.
Thank you for having me.
You have been critical, had a public opinion about President Trump's memo of understanding that was negotiated with Iran. That seems to have fallen apart. What are your thoughts on where that stands today and what's next?
Well, President Trump is also critical of the MOU at this point. He has been very clear that he is no longer abiding by it because the Iranians, all the Iranians had to do, according to the Memorandum of Understanding, was let free flow of traffic through international waterways, that is the Strait of Hormuz. And in exchange, the United States would lift the blockade and waive the sanctions we had on Iranian oil. That the United States made good on our end of the MOU, but the Iranians continue to fire into the strait, continue to try to assert itself as the, quote, manager of the strait. President Trump said that was not what you were supposed to do. And so the MOU, only a few weeks after it was signed by both heads of government, is in the rearview mirror, and the United States is moving forward with military strikes at this point.
You know, across more than 4 decades, the Iranian leadership has not kept their word or honored agreements they have signed across multiple administrations. What credibility do they have left when it comes to negotiating in the public square? It seems to me none.
None. And we have to remember that regimes are motivated by particular things, and not every regime is the same. And the Iran regime at this point, even though because of the United States with our great allies, the Israelis, eliminated a couple of tiers of leadership during Operation Midnight Hammer and Epic Fury, that the people who are in charge right now in the Iranian government are still the IRGC. They're still committed to the Islamic Revolution. And you still see the IRGC, and the head of the IRGC is still alive, and he is still telling the IRGC militia to fire into the Strait. These are people who still are calling for the assassination of President Trump and other Americans. They're still crying out death to Israel, death to United States during their funeral of the so-called supreme leader. And so these people are very committed to this ideology. And so until you have people in charge of that country who are not, you're not going to have individuals who are going to negotiate in good faith.
Some months back, thousands and thousands of the Iranian people poured into the streets objecting to their current government. Now, thousands of them died, but there's been an absence of that since then, in spite of the American attacks and all that's happened. Is there some sort of repression being expressed towards those people, or is the fear still so great?
So I think that there's both. It's fear and repression. And we did have some of the bravest, youngest, most energetic opponents of the Iran regime came out into the streets to really try to motivate not just their own people, but for the rest of the free world to understand that the Iranian people want to go into a different direction. They do not want to be part of the Islamic Revolution. And these are people who just a few decades ago were not oppressed and controlled by the Islamic Revolution. So they do have practice in self-government. They do want to have a free society. And so these individuals were, of course, as you said, they were killed by the regime. And, you know, one of the things that I find incredibly sad and frustrating is in the beginning of Epic Fury, the U.S. and Israeli military operations, that you did have the head of Central Command, Admiral Cooper, told the Iranian people, don't come out yet and oppose your regime. Wait till we tell you to. That call for the United States to tell the Iranians to come back out and take control of the regime never came. Instead, we went the ceasefire route to try to negotiate. And so it's been pretty quiet. And the Iranian people, I think, are still very afraid of the regime.
Beyond just that messaging, is there anything we can do, a way to provide arms or support or encouragement? Regime change has been a tricky problem for us in the region.
So I definitely do not think that the United States should be doing this openly, explicitly from the top down. This is not something that the United States should be engaged in terms of, you know, the United States sending in a large land operation to try to execute a regime change. I do think that this has to come from the bottom up, from the Iranian people. But there are things that we can do. First of all, we've already set the conditions to completely weaken and fracture the regime through economic coercion, maximum pressure economically, the blockade, and then also the fact that we have taken out with the Israelis so much of the regime leadership, but we can get arms to the Iranian people. We can do that. And I would hope that our intelligence community has been finding out which factions inside the government and inside across the population would be amenable to that. But we just have to make sure that we get them to the right people. And then over time, the Iranian people, I think, can push back. Remember, the standing army in Iran is not the IRGC. The IRGC is committed to the defense of the Islamic Revolution, but the standing army, I mean, those people were just pulled in and they care about Iran, the nation, not necessarily the Islamic Revolution, the ideology. And so my hope is always that you do get a significant number of people from that army that can help overthrow the Islamic Republic.
Well, it seems to me with our intelligence and the cooperation of the Israelis, we could remove what's left of the Iranian leadership if we made that an objective.
Yeah, so right now, the military operations that the United States is engaged in right now, to your point, we are not going after regime leadership. We are not eliminating the IRGC. Instead, the targeting is only to take out military targets that are being used to fire into the Strait of Hormuz. So clearly, to me, if you just look at the military targets, the objective seems to be you just degrade their capabilities to get oil through the strait. That would be something very different than continuing to try to weaken the regime so that the Iranian people can finally take their country back.
Well, Rebeccah, we need to take a short break. I hope you'll stay with us for another segment.
Absolutely.
And if you've got a phone nearby and you're watching, you can try logging on to ajnow.com. Send us an email. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. I'll be right back. I've learned as a pastor there's a tremendous difference in a crowd and a community of faith. When people decide to step out of the crowd and invest their time and their resources, they become a part of a community and it changes their lives. Well, I want to give you that invitation. I'm grateful you're a part of the crowd who watch the ministry. I want to ask you to consider becoming a monthly ministry partner. I believe if you'll make that regular commitment to what God is doing through this ministry, it'll bring momentum to your spiritual life, and it will help us reach more people than we've ever reached with the gospel before. America is turning 250 years old. That's something that should unify us. We have so much to celebrate. There is no place like America. Our freedoms and liberties, they are unmatched in this world. Everything that's good about America, our laws, our opportunities, the prosperity we've enjoyed, well, they've come to us because of our faith. We've created a series of emails celebrating 250 years of our country. Find out how Christianity has played a role in this nation from its founding until now. You'll receive a new email each week throughout the series. Each one is designed to help you see our blessings and our heritage in a new way, how faith has played a powerful role all the way through. It's one way we're celebrating America's 250th. We hope you'll join us. You can sign up now at alanjackson.com/250. We're back now with Rebeccah Heinrichs, national security expert and senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Rebeccah, let's shift to NATO. What were your thoughts on our relationship with those other members coming out of that conference?
Well, I thought that this was a great win for President Trump. Really since the first Trump administration, President Trump has sought to make the NATO alliance much stronger. And to make it much stronger, you need not only the United States to invest in our own defense industrial base, which we have not sufficiently done over the last couple of decades, but we need our NATO allies to do the same. There's been too many Europeans who have taken their federal budgets and invested it in social spending and entitlement spending and not investing in their own defense industrial bases because they're relying on the United States to provide their protection. And so now coming out of this NATO summit, I was thrilled to see not only have NATO members agreed to get to 5% of their own GDP to spend on defense, which is a significant increase over that 2% initially that they've committed to for NATO, but they're doing it. These countries are building weapon systems, they're investing in the weapon systems, and then the last couple of things I'll say is they also committed to agreeing with the United States that Iran should never have a nuclear weapon and that Iran should not ever have control over those international waterways in the Strait of Hormuz. So I thought it was a great achievement for the United States.
The majority of the reporting in the media suggested that our NATO allies were not supportive in any way of the conflict with Iran. I don't think that's fully accurate, is it?
No, it's not accurate. And in fact, if it wasn't for European allies, the United States would not have been able to conduct our military operations against Iran. Our bases overseas many of them are in Europe, and they're not just there because Americans are defending Europeans. They're there because we want to be far from our shores, projected into that particular region so that we can cooperate with the Europeans on intelligence sharing, on integrated air and missile defense, and also so that we can project power into the Middle East. Now, early on in the conflict, there was a couple of instances in which some European countries denied the United States access to those bases, but it was very short-lived. In the UK in particular, you can think of the Italians. Spain has been a hard problem, an ongoing hard problem. But those other two, it was very short-lived, and we have been conducting military flights out of those European air bases, and it's called a tanker air bridge, where our tankers can refuel our military airplanes. They've been flying across 8 European nations in order for the United States to do these operations with the Israelis. And so if it wasn't for the Europeans and our basing there, we would not have been able to conduct those operations.
Well, there's been a lot of concern, appropriately so, I believe, about Iranian access to nuclear material because of their aggressive attitudes towards the international community. But Russia and China have been aggressively building up their nuclear capabilities as well. What threat level do they pose to us? We know they have aspirations for global influence.
So when I explain this to people, what I tell them is, I don't think people should be fearful about the possibility of nuclear war. I think the reason that we should be concerned that countries like China and Russia are investing so much of their own military budgets into their nuclear weapons is because they want to use these nuclear weapons coercively. So they threaten the United States, they threaten our allies, and we have to take that seriously. We cannot just always count these things as bluffs. And so this will be the first time in American history that the United States has to deter, to try to convince our adversaries not to act aggressively against our interests. We have to deter two nuclear powers simultaneously, China and Russia, major nuclear powers. So during the Cold War, it was the United States and the Soviet Union. This is a much more complicated problem. And as you pointed out, China and Russia are increasingly collaborating, and they're collaborating with Iran and North Korea. So there really is this growing axis, and the United States just has to work with our allies to make sure that we're constantly working to convince our adversaries that acting aggressively against us or our interests will never be worth the cost.
I want to switch to the war in Ukraine briefly. The CIA Director Ratcliffe revealed last week through intelligence and open sourcing that the recruits, when they arrive at the front line, have an average life expectancy of 20 to 30 minutes, the Russian recruits. What are we to make of this conflict? Is there any imagination of an end in sight?
So I had the privilege of going to Ukraine in May, and so I got to learn from Ukrainian military officials, political officials, and their intelligence officials what the country is doing to protect itself. And it is remarkable what the Ukrainians have been able to do. The Russians are still trying to target civilian targets in Ukraine. The Russians are persecuting Christians in Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine. So this really is a horrible, bloody, terrible war. But the Ukrainians have been able to defend hearth and home and their own sovereignty very, very well. And they've been able to develop military capabilities that even the United States is benefiting from, especially when it comes to drone defense and drone offense. And so my view is that in order for the United States to compel an end to this horrible conflict is to support Ukraine. And we can do that by squeezing the Russians economically to choke out their war machine, and also make sure that we are building weapons that the Europeans can buy to get them into Ukraine, which is what President Trump has been busy trying to do. And it does look like the United States is really engaged in a bit of a pivot here. Rather than acting sort of like a neutral observer, we are now trying to enable that Ukraine to have everything it needs to compel an end to this war on terms that are good for Ukraine and good for the United States.
Well, Rebeccah, thank you for your time today. Your insights are always helpful.
Thank you. It's always a privilege to be with you.
We'll be back in a moment with your emails. I want to give you a personal invitation to join my podcast, Culture and Christianity.
You don't compromise the truth, but you say it where the people know that you care about them.
We're trying to understand how to take our faith outside the walls of the church and live it out in the marketplace.
I just never understood the double standard because they punished me while my peers were allowed to talk about how devastated they were that Roe versus Wade was overturned.
I brought in some friends, people that are trying to do this on a regular basis.
They're never going to stop me because the truth is the truth. I'd rather be on God's side than to be a coward.
You know, we've been living in a season of unprecedented deception, propaganda, manipulation.
Our best option was to run. We were timing ourselves. I was trying to think, how can I protect my kids?
Well, I want to be a part of seeing culture and Christianity intersect. I hope you'll join the podcast soon. Thank you for taking the time to send us your emails, your thoughts and opinions. Always impressive. Libby C. from Virginia, listening to your interview with Senator Blackburn about birthright tourism, I find it unsettling that American citizens aborted over 1 million babies in 2025 alone, while other countries are coming here to have their babies for American citizenship. Well, Libby, I agree with you that abortion is a problem, and especially in the United States, that's where I have my citizenship. We are not treating human life as if it was important or valuable in the sight of God. And until we change that, I think we forfeit a tremendous amount of our future. But I don't believe that China holds a greater value of human life. They have an average of about 9 million abortions per year. And if we go back just a bit further, from 1980 to 2016, they had a one-child-only policy that it's estimated resulted in over 300 million abortions. See, if we would choose the sanctity of human life and protect our unborn, then we could take that value globally and be a champion for that. We're not doing it, unfortunately. Judy B. from California says, please elaborate on using the Lord's name in vain. I understand not swearing in the Lord's name. I'm referring to things which I catch myself doing. Phrases I use like, oh God, seriously. It's come to my attention quite often recently. Thank you, Pastor. Well, in the list of commandments, we're told not to use the Lord's name in vain. I think that's far more than profanity. I think it's an invitation to recognize that God is ever present and that He's listening, and that we want to lead our lives in a way that is respectful of the Creator of earth and heaven and everything that's in them. If we would do that, it would change our attitudes, the fear of God would grow in our hearts, and we would have more blessings because of it. Great questions. Thanks for spending a few moments with us. God is moving in the earth, folks. Let's join Him. Good night, and God bless.